Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to our installment of On Being Human Conversations. I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you today. It's quite a tough topic, a heavy topic, but I hope that you will all find it useful. And I have a very special guest who's going to be joining me. Her name is Krystel Assounga. She's a dear colleague of mine whom we trained together during our master's training, our clinical training, and she has some valuable insights around today's topic. So we will be talking all about grief, we'll be talking about loss, and more specifically, we will also be speaking about how to deal with the loss of with a sibling. So very excited to have you back this evening. It's our first webinar for the year. For some of you that may not be part of my newsletter, I had written on the newsletter this year that I started the year quite slow, and hence this being the first installment of our on Being Human conversations. And I'm really just trying to move through the year at a sustainable pace. And I hope that you too are being gentle to yourself as the year starts. And I look forward to more conversations. So this is our second last episode for our first season. Can you believe it? It will. We would have wrapped up season one of On Being Human Conversations. So really excited to have you here. We will have our um, last episode of On Being Human Conversations in a few weeks' time, and then we wrap up season one, and then we move into season two. So, once again, welcome, and I hope that you will find today's conversation engaging, thoughtful, moving in some ways for some of you that may be resonating with what the topic brings up for you. So, without further ado, let me introduce our guest for the evening, Mrs. Krystel Assounga. While she jumps on screen, there she is. She's joining us all the way from New York. Krystel, hello.
Hello, everyone.
Good. Is it good afternoon? Is it lunchtime for you?
Yeah, it is. It is good afternoon. It is just past 1 o'clock at 1:04 to be exact. I know it's 7 p.m. So you guys are winding down while we're in the middle of our afternoon. But it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much for making time, Krystel, and spending your lunch hour with us. I can see you at the practice.
Yeah.
I was just, during the introductions, I shared with our attendees that you are a dear colleague of mine,
Yes.
whom we trained together, our clinical training. So we've traveled quite a journey together. And we've done life, even though we're in separate places, we've also done life together in our practices and in our personal lives. So it feels very special for you to be here today as
Yeah.
our first guest for the year.
Yeah.
And I look forward to the conversation this evening. So perhaps let me hand over to you, and Krystel, you introduce yourself and tell our watchers and our listeners out there who you are, and yes, what you are up to in New York.
Yeah. So thank you so much for that introduction, Batetshi. I feel as if this is almost quite serendipitous, considering like where we started off, where we met. I think it was in 2013. Running around the campus of UCT, trying to make sense of this degree called clinical psychology. But as B said, we've been doing life together and running together for the last going on 10 years, 11 years. So my background as a clinical psychologist, I trained with Batetshi at UCT, where I then went and did an internship at Adult Hospital, and also did my ComServe at Adult Hospital, where I worked in the female inpatient unit. So that was a really interesting time. And then my husband and I decided to move across the world to New York, where I've been practicing as a therapist. Specifically, I work a family center for bipolar. It's a private practice in Manhattan. And specifically, we work within the mood disorder, specifically bipolar, but I did then go and specialize in maternal mental health and perinatal mental health, where I've been working. Part of my practice is with moms, new moms, incoming moms, people that are considering to go on the motherhood journey, and have are having challenges with kind of managing that, as well as what does it mean to be a mother with the challenges of mental illness. And so that's really been a passion, and it really kind of started out to myself. I became a mom and kind of saw kind of the postpartum journey, not only the pre, the peri, the postpartum journey. And so that's kind of what I've been doing specifically on that. So I as I mentioned, I am a wife. I am a mother to two young girls. I wear many different hats, but the beauty about those different hats is that you can take them off and put them back on. And so at the moment, it's great to be here in capacity as a clinical psychologist therapist. And yeah, I don't know if you wanted me to add anything else, but let's see if that's if that's good.
I think that covers it. That covers it, Krystel. Thank you for that introduction. So I suppose, Krystel, let's jump into our topic for the evening. It's quite a heavy topic, quite a sore topic,
Yeah.
which I thought would be important for us to share with the audience, share information, some psychological tips and skills that people can leave here feeling empowered after today, in spite of it being quite a sore topic. And just to acknowledge that we are speaking about grief and loss, and we will break it apart as we go along. But to acknowledge that there may be people who are part of this webinar where they are they're at the start of their journey. And that is particularly hard. That people maybe at the start, maybe sort of somewhere halfway there, or still finding their way in this process, and just wanting to acknowledge the different points at which some of our attendees may be at with grief. And just to open up space to say that we invite all experiences into today's conversation.
Sure.
But yes, Krystel, maybe let's speak about what is grief.
Yeah.
Let's speak about this very difficult experience as humans, that the one thing we really struggle with. So maybe just share your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting about grief is that it's always an imminent part of our life, right? The fact that we live life and we're gonna be experiencing that emotion, that process. However, we don't ever know when. And that's kind of the conundrum that we're having to deal with. And when we think about grief, some of the things the definition around it, I was looking, in kind of trying to define it, is like there's this deep sorrow. It really is kind of this deep sorrow, and often it's attributed to losing someone or grieving someone, but also there are the multitudes of grief that we experience in our lives, right? Whether it is, and really the grief that we experience is perhaps a future that we thought was going to be, but is no longer, right? So whether it is getting that job, or maybe doing life with a certain partner that you thought you were in, and that relationship breaks up, and so kind of loss and grief is a part of our lives, and specifically it's a part of our everyday process, right? It's a part of and I think sometimes the grief that we experience it evokes a part of ourselves that we didn't actually know was there, right? And we can sometimes sometimes grief can be something as small as, it can be losing a job opportunity. Specifically, I mean, we were discussing within the COVID, when we experienced COVID, there was multitude of griefs on multiple different, in multiple different arenas. But really, when we start to kind of think about how grief plays out in our lives, we start to think about it's a part of ourselves that becomes lost, but also learning that you need to move forward. There is, you cannot stay where you are, but it's always about moving forward. I don't know, but if you wanted to add anything to that specifically.
Mm, mm. Yes, I think what comes to mind when you speak about the different kinds of that grief takes different forms. It makes me think about how loss was such a big outcome of COVID 2020 and COVID and the years to follow, 2021, 2022, 2023. I think for me, when I think about COVID, the biggest theme is loss and grief and mourning. So I do agree that we often think that grief is about the death of of a loved one, but I think that that is almost in a way that's the ultimate loss, right, of the physicality of someone. But we do experience loss on a daily basis, and we do need to learn to deal with loss. We need to mourn our losses and grief so that we can move on into other aspects of our lives and open up space so that you can actually move in a meaningful way. So I think that's what stands out for me. But Krystel, when we do talk about grief, what would you say is sort of what are the different stages, if I may call it, or different maybe emotions that individuals that are experiencing grief may go through?
Yeah, and what's interesting about even that, grief is a journey, right? And even so, I love that you kind of welcome everyone who is on their journey at different parts of their journey, right? The emotions that we deal with is almost that sense of denial, that sense of, that sense of denial, that sense of anger, bewilderment. I think that's a big one. It's sort of like how can it be? Like how, right? And when we kind of think about that, we try and make sense of the nonsensical, right? That can sometimes leave people at a loss to even understand what is going on. So confusion, I know that's a very big one that we often encounter, confusion, and really um, trying to piece together or trying to make sense of something that we know is always to come, right? So we know that it happens to other people, right? We see other people go through various different things. But I think some of the feelings that we come up with, that I think is the feelings of despair, right? And really grief, and specifically the grief journey, is often will be different depending on the relationship that you may have had with that person. And it's also dependent on the person, right? Grieving may be somebody that you maybe did not have a good relationship with, maybe very different to grieving somebody that you were really close to, right? Grieving somebody, perhaps an abuser, may be very different to somebody that you held in high esteem. So with regards to grief in that journey, it's not only just about kind of it's not only about the feelings that you sit with, but it's also kind of the emotional attachment or lack thereof that you had with the person, right? Perhaps that parents maybe or is maybe very different to grieving a romantic partner or grieving a sibling that you've done life with. And I think the aspect of grief does take and I think as psychologists and theorists and philosophers have tried to conceptualize this feeling, But really, from what we've studied, right, the Kubler-Ross model of grief, the 5 stages of grief. There are also other faith-based um, uh, um, definitions around kind of what grief is and how it manifests itself. But really, ultimately, I really think it has to do with the connection that you had with the person, or not only the connection that you had with the person, but also the the relationship that no longer will be, right? Which I think it really kind of um, it really kind of may change also our perception and how we engage on the grief journey, because how we engage on a grief journey with someone that perhaps an abuser or somebody who's done us harm is going to be very different, because the things that maybe you have wanted to say you can no longer say, or you do not have the opportunity to say. So I do think also with grief sometimes, there's almost a feeling of being robbed of something, that something has been taken away, right? I keep going back to, you know, the grief that you have with the person that no longer is will be dependent on somebody who maybe died a sudden death versus somebody who was maybe murdered, right? They're very, very different things. Somebody who had a terminal illness where death was imminent may be very different to kind of the loss of a child, right? So those are kind of I feel that the journey with grief does take on a different, will take on a variety, a myriad of different emotions based on the person. Yeah.
But it's I mean, what you're describing is just a constellation, right, of experiences, and how it really will be different for every individual. And Krystel, one of the emotions that I find, in my work that's hard to sometimes even name, whether it's, with the patients I work with, or even myself at times, is, something that you alluded to earlier on about the nature of the attachment or the nature of the relationship, is where at times it takes a lot of like courage and a lot of sort of there's a tenderness around it, when people actually come out and say, I actually felt relieved that this person is no longer alive. That there's such a heaviness in saying that, but it's a real experience for some people.
Yeah. Well, I feel as if it's almost as if the tenderness and almost like, I don't want to say taboo. I feel as if like with grief comes a certain kind of perception of how you should feel and the emotion that you should have with it, and the relief that perhaps the people that are left behind are having to deal with can be very challenging to navigate, because it's drawing upon the fact that like it's touching a space where you realize, am I allowed to feel this? There's a question like, am I even allowed to feel this? Am I even allowed to kind of feel this sense of uh, relief, perhaps joy, perhaps kind of like the burden that was is no longer is, and I feel lighter. Is that good? And I think, feelings and emotions are just indicators, right? For us to be curious about what is it about that emotion, or what does this emotion elicit in you, for you to be able to process through it. And I think in our work, I think often, there's this perception that feelings are either good or bad, and it really isn't. It's about how do we make sense of it for that person, right? And free of judgment, because I think sometimes the space, particularly with the people that I work with, because on the outside it's filled with so much judgment, that they come in feeling like, I've got this, I want to share it, but I can't share it because for fear that you may judge me, you may change your perception of me. So what does it mean that, I've been caring for my mother for so many years, and finally she's gone, and the burden of having to be there in, physically, emotionally, mentally is no longer there. Like, can I feel this? And I think, I think sometimes the reason why grief can be such, it's a tender topic because it dives into parts of ourselves that we're not willing or maybe are scared to go into, scared to kind of look into before fear of what we may find. And what we may find may be contradictory to what the setup of what people are expected for you to experience. And I think, in our work with it, certainly in mine, I think that sometimes, I've had patients who have lost a sibling and at the time did not have a really good relationship with them. The sibling had chosen a different type of lifestyle and had stolen different things from her. And she was just like, like I was meant to have this discussion with you about how you hurt me, but now I can't. So now it's almost being robbed of an opportunity or robbed of a conversation and robbed of a feeling that I want to feel that I can no longer feel, I can no longer process. And the process that I will do will have to be by myself. Like I will do it by myself. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, now that you've, kind of gone there with being quite now talking about a specific kind of loss, which is the loss of a sibling. And maybe let's speak a bit about that, just about the impact of those who are left behind, those who have lost a sibling, and just sort of exploring those family dynamics around what happens when a sibling passes away.
Yeah. And I love that you brought this up, and this didn't come, this topic didn't come out of the blue. I think you and I have had multiple different topics throughout the years, multiple different conversations throughout the years about this, and just to kind of share in my own experience. So I'm one of four children. I'm the eldest of four. So I have it's myself, my brother and I are 2 years apart, and then I have a sister. We have an 8-year age gap, and then I have a brother. So within 10 years, my mom had 4 children, and so my sister was 21 and healthy. In 2019, she was studying medicine in China, and she came home at the beginning of the year for it was about a 3-week stint. She came home and she was doing a kind of an internship in Zambia. And so she went to Zambia for 2 weeks, and actually at the beginning of her 2nd week, she passed away suddenly. And it was very difficult because at the time my husband and I were living in the US, and I remember getting that call. And anyone who's ever gotten a call of that nature, you will remember everything about that time when life changed. Life changed. There was no going back, right? And so even kind of going, obviously sharing the news with the family, going back it felt like somewhat of a dream state, right? Having to go back, because it's not just kind of the feeling and the emotions that you're dealing with, but the admin of what, having to make preparations, right? Having to make preparation for the funeral and the funeral service, and you realize that when you get wrapped up in all of this, particularly so for the different family dynamics, I remember my aunts coming in and resuming the role of the older sisters and having to kind of spearhead through as my parents were trying to navigate this space. And so it was a very difficult couple of weeks because of the fact that we were obviously not only dealing with the loss, but also having to kind of navigate each of our feelings, right? Because our feelings, my 2 brothers, they felt there was this, we felt the same, but it wasn't the same, right? Because the nature of our relationship with our sister was very different, and obviously the family dynamics with my parents. And so being the eldest of that being the eldest, you kind of resume the role of being the responsible one and having to welcome people and having to kind of be the strength and be strong for my parents. At the time, my parents were having to repatriate her back to South Africa. So that journey in itself, I can't even imagine what that was like for them, having to go identify and then having to kind of navigate that journey. But one of the things that I realized in going through that process myself was that you the way in which you see your parents change, right? Your parents made more human in that space, and you have a clear view of vulnerability and what that looks like, right? Because although my parents attempted to show up as best they could, they were still making sense of what life would be like with one less child. And so seeing that and navigating that space was somewhat it does kind of, it makes you question a lot of things, not only just about life, but also about, how fragile actually people who you look up to can be, and how you're having to kind of navigate in such a way that you don't put your own emotions aside, but it's everything feels heightened, everything feels raw, everything feels like it's brought to the surface, and you realize that this doesn't affect me, but it affects me in a very different way. And through kind of seeing how my parents had to kind of navigate this, I learned to see what grace looked like. I learned to experience what grace was. Because for people that have been able to support me at the time, they were journeying themselves, and then you kind of having to realize, okay, so what does support look like for me? And yes, there was the support of our community. Our community came around, and you really kind of felt the love and you really felt the support. But you realize ultimately it's a journey that you're having to go on by yourself. And you have the family dynamic, and in the dynamics, there are multiple different dynamics, because you have the sibling dynamic and also you had the parental dynamic. And the parental dynamic felt very isolated, because they're themselves having to kind of make sense of their own experience. But I remember with my brothers, there was a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, a lot of pain, right? Because anger, what underlies anger is majority pain, and it's a pain that you realize that nothing can make it better. Nothing's going to make it better. And so I think in understanding also kind of the different sibling positions, right? Sibling positions change, but also they don't change, right? So I'm still the eldest. I'll always remain the eldest. My brother's still the second eldest. But for my younger brother, it was a very interesting place for him to navigate, because of the age difference, they had the closest relationship. And so for my younger brother, William, it was trying to understand, how do I do life without my other pair? My mom had us in pairs. And so I think having to remain open, as well as being able to deal with the grief, with the loss, and making sense, was a very challenging road to walk through. It was challenging because you realize that everyone was on their own journey and everyone was doing the best that they can at the level of their own experience. And I think often, being in the field that we're in, there's kind of this assumption like, well, you know what's going on. Well, you know how to. And it's like, I may know what's going on, but I myself, I'm trying to make sense of the theories that I know intellectually make sense, but emotionally, emotionally, there's a dearth. Emotionally, it was very difficult to bridge the gap between what I knew to understand to be very intellectual and what I was feeling. So I don't know if you go into any.
Yes.
The,
Yeah, I mean, I find, Crystal, that's so profound. Just a few nuggets there about how um, you grieve differently. Everyone has a unique grieving journey. And you shared about your experience. And it also touched on something you mentioned earlier on, that um, the type of loss also impacts how you grieve and how you mourn, whether it was a sudden or unexpected loss, or an expected loss. I think that what you were describing was really a loss that was completely unexpected. And while there is some level of preparation that helps with an expected loss, to your point that you can never be fully prepared for an emotional experience. You may be prepared in some ways intellectually, but you can never be fully prepared for an emotional experience. And I think that that's what you were touching on, or that's what came up for me as you were sharing your personal experience. And Crystal, I suppose what's also at the back of my mind is how did that personal experience of losing a sibling who you are very close to, you're very, very close to your younger sister. How did that impact the work that you now do in your professional life, in your clinical practice?
Yeah. I think it provided a deeper level of understanding in a way that allows me to see things from a different perspective, or from the similar perspective, I should say, but also being mindful of not, despite the fact that our loss may be the same, my loss is very different to your loss, and we're talking about your loss here. I think often, and it was interesting because over the last year, I have had a number of patients that I'm still currently seeing who have lost a sibling, and and then they're very much at the beginning stage of their journey. So they're trying to put words to feelings, to emotions, and it can be also very messy. And I think what's how it's impacted the work is I'm able to provide perhaps a language that they are beginning to learn in a way that is able to resonate with them. And so for me, I think there's a greater level of empathy that I feel like I've been able to experience. Specifically, I think what's interesting is that despite the fact that, so you and I both trained within the within the modality of psychodynamic model, and so you realize that you're never really the blank slate. You're never fully coming in and kind of, it's two, when we're doing therapy, it's two people coming together and co-creating something, And so what's been interesting specifically in my clinical practice, specifically in dealing with this topic, is that there's a greater level of understanding, but I cannot and will not assume that I know exactly what it is that you went through, because the relationship that you had with your sibling or you had with that person is and will be different. And so based on that it actually allows me to have some objectivity, but also with that allows me to have some grace with where they are at in their journey, and allows me to kind of essentially show up as fully as I can be and be really authentic in the space. Because I think sometimes as we practice, authenticity is such a big part of how we relate and how we develop rapport with our patients and with the people that we see. And so it's allowed me to be more authentic in that space, but also has allowed me to, to have a deeper and greater level of empathy, ultimately, when it comes to these topics. But mind you, I'm now further on in my journey, 5 years in. I don't think I could say the same thing if it was 3 years ago. So even that nature and that journey, the grief journey that we walk through and continue to walk, is going to change as you move away and as you and as different things happen in life and as you experience different things in life.
Yes, there's often, people often speak about, or we, as clinicians, we often speak about the waves of grief, right? And I think that you're in a way sharing that it's been a journey of 5 years, but it's a wave, right? You kind of go on top of the wave, it crashes, you come down with it, you go up, and it's like this sort of dance that you have to negotiate. Can you maybe speak a little bit a bit more about that, the waves of grief?
Yeah, I think with regards to the waves of grief, I think there's something to be said around as you journey through life and as you go through different experiences and as you walk essentially the different chapters, things will come up in various different ways, right? So when there's a stage of denial, you're bargaining, you are there's a stage of acceptance. I think that, to put those stamps can be somewhat very limiting to being able to fully experience the emotion of grief, and the emotions that come with grief. I feel as if sometimes I try not to kind of pigeonhole these processes because it feels as if we've ticked this, we're going. It really it moves. Like you said, it's like a wave. It moves. It's fluid. It's not like, okay, now that I've dealt with this stage, I can now move on to the next wave. Now that I finished grade 3, I can move on to grade 4. It doesn't happen that way. And I think that's kind of made me think and made me, made me reflect on how we also think about theories and how we apply them, because how perhaps we define them and how it's applicable, it may not be applicable. And so when I think about the different stages of grief, I think about also the different life stages that people will go through, right? I think about how where I was prior to having children to now having children, and where where I am now, speaking to my girls about their art is very different, right? How it is that we also even honor that person, and how that in honoring that person, you realize that actually, if we think about the genogram of the tree, that tree is no longer there, and will never. And that lineage, that line, has come to an abrupt arrest. And so, even thinking about that, and thinking about, well, as we experience the different things in life, particularly when it comes around anniversaries and when it comes around, I remember, we always think about the year first, right? The first time that, your first birthday, your first marking all the year, you get to the end of the year and you're like, okay, I made it. When we come to the end, the first year anniversary, it feels like I get a sense that there's almost like this feeling of triumph, and that, I made it through. But then what happens after that is like, no, but I didn't make it through, because I'm going to continue to make through, because life will continue to go on, right? So despite the fact that it will be the year first, it will always be the years of nevers, right? Not having the opportunity to be able to, my children and future children and grandchildren to be able to meet this person, not having the opportunity. So even those waves that wave that you think about, it's not as if like it's over and done with after the first year. It's always going to be a continuous thing. And to realize that in revisiting these feelings, it doesn't make I saw an illustration the other day when we talked about grief. It said that as you go through life and as you learn to navigate or learn this new language of grief, the capacity for grief expands. It doesn't get smaller. Your capacity to understand and to go through those emotions expand. And as your capacity expands, it allows you actually to move through it in a different way, where it may not be as painful as it was before, but it doesn't mean that the pain is gone, right? And I think that's what it is when you were mentioning moving in with the waves. Yeah.
And Crystal, something that people often struggle with around grief is how to keep the person alive in their physical absence. And I'm curious about what your thoughts are on that. That how do you keep your loved one alive inside of you, even in the physical absence? Is that something that you've had to, grapple with, whether it's personally or just in the work that you do with
Yeah.
patients?
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you say that, because obviously based on the relationship of the person will depend on how that manifests in your life, right? And I know that a couple years after my sister passed away, her friends actually wanted to have a get together. So on her birthday, we would have a get together, and everyone would wear purple because it was her favorite color, and we would kind of share our different memories. And I remember my brother being very resistant. He was not on the call. He was very resistant to that. And I remember having a conversation like, why couldn't you hop on for like 5-10 minutes? And then he's like, that's not how I want to choose to celebrate her. And so I realized that based on the relationship and based on how you want to, how you want to keep that person alive will depend, despite the fact that yes, we're family and yes, we're siblings. How my brother chooses to keep her memory alive may be different to how I choose to keep her memory alive. And so, you realize, even with some of my work with the patient, especially when it came to the 1 year, I remember one of my patients says, I want to cook their favorite meal, because because I want to cook their favorite meal. I want to do a plate for them, and I want to sit and eat. And I thought that was so beautiful, that was so honoring, because they and also how they did it in their families, that they didn't actually take away the seat, right? They were a family of 6. They didn't take the seat away. The seat is still there. So when they have dinner, they honor that person on a daily basis. So it's a reminder that person's no longer there, but also a reminder of that person's spirit will continuously be there. And so, and also, I do think that it also will depend on, obviously, spiritual values and kind of faith values. I know for me, being a practicing Christian, I keeping my sister alive is an everyday occurrence. She is in all the things that in the experiences that I live. But I know that for some people, and also in my work, what's amazing about some of the things that we get to do, particularly in walking this journey alongside this person, is for them to create, well, what would it look like for you? What would you want to do? How would you want to celebrate this? And really for them to kind of put thought around it. There's a sense of intentionality, but also it doesn't mean permanent. So just because you did this the 1 year doesn't mean you have to do this the next year. You can do the same thing. But I think the beauty about it is the fact that you get to honor the person the best way that you can and however you want to, and it doesn't need to be the same thing. That's really, I think that's kind of how it's kind of shown up. Yeah.
So just, I mean, also what comes to mind as well as you're speaking is also about, people's individual belief systems and value systems. But I also wonder whether that is impacted or is changed, or it shifts a bit, or there's something about the loss of a loved one that puts things into perspective
Mm.
or puts life into perspective. I often, my experience is that, individuals really start to think deeply, even more than ever, about life and the meaning of life, finding more meaning or finding more purpose in life.
Yeah.
And let's speak about that in a bit, but we will take questions. We'll see if we have questions in our chat or from our audience, and there will hopefully there'll be a banner that comes up shortly with a few questions. But while we do wait for that, we do have about 12 minutes or so before we end. Krystel, for you, how did the loss of your sister redefine, shift, change how you started seeing life?
Mm. Yeah. So I think I will say this. I think there was definitely this this sense of um, I want to say it redefined life in a way in which I was like, I thought to myself, it could never happen to us. Like how,
Mm,
right? So you almost you get in touch with a part of your humanity that you didn't even know was there. You
mm,
begin to kind of you really begin to think, despite the fact that I would, I have a belief. You really begin to think about, um, you know, how does one you really begin to think about that there has to be more than just this. That was
mm,
like this cannot be the end. And I think for me, and what's been interesting in our journeys is that my siblings have had to redefine life in a big way, and we have different views on that. But I think you realize that actually the meaning of life has to is what you create in the everyday, right? You
mm,
find a meaning, you need to find a purpose. But then also there's a part of me that's like, well, the beautiful thing about the meaning of life is also the legacy that you leave, and also seeing, for me, it was beautiful to see the legacy that my sister had left and how many people, how she was loved by so many people, and also you realize that I lost a sibling, but also other people lost a friend, and you realize that it's not just my baby sister; it's she was out in the world doing what she did, and I think it for me it kind of made me think about, okay, how do I want to what will my impact be? What is
mm,
the legacy that I want to live? And not only for myself, but for my children and for the people around me. And it really kind of makes you think about like what it really made me think about what I am doing in the day to day and the now and how it
mm,
going forward. Um, and it's a question that that continuously comes up. It's a question that I keep at the forefront, and it's a question that actually challenges me on a day to day basis. It's a question that
mm,
to it's not just only about the now, but it's about the now and also what are you going to do, next.
mm, mm. Absolutely. And Krystel, are there any sort of coping strategies or tools that you would want to share with our attendees, the people that are listening out there and they're sitting at home and just, at the start of their journey or just in the middle of it, and they're really struggling to process the loss of a loved one, or specifically a sibling or even a child. We may have, parents who are here who may need some kind of guidance on how do I help myself, but also how do I help my child who's lost a sibling.
Yeah. Um, I feel as if we always want to get tools, right? We always want what is the thing? What is the thing that's going to get me to the other side? And truly, I think in my own journey, it's you're having to walk the road. You're having to, that is a tool. You're having to walk the road, and obviously having somebody alongside you, whether it's, going to grief counseling or having, a support system that can journey with you. But despite the fact of having the support system, really, this is a road that you're going to have to walk alone, right? And I think with that, as you begin to walk that road, there are parts of you that begin to open up that you didn't even know were there. There are parts of you that you begin to kind of really kind of lean into, and that, and it's not to say that it's going to be easy, right? And that's the hard part. It's like, how do I make the hard part as easy as possible? And I know that was a question I asked, and the response I got was like, you don't. And I think for me, that was, it sometimes can catch me off guard, but really the road that you walk is you having to walk the road knowing that there has to be something good on the other side. It's knowing that you will make it on the other side, but you will not be the same person that you are on the other side. So part of that journey is also having to let go, right? Having to let go of some of those things, having to have some of those really hard conversations, having to be met with parts of yourself that you don't want to be met with, being able to process that and really kind of journey and having the faith, dare I say it, the belief that you will get to the other side, but you will not be the same. And I think also being able to think that and being able to be okay with that, it's because you will not be the same. You cannot be the same. And so with that will make the journey somewhat bearable. Somewhat bearable.
So I suppose seeing this as a process, that the only way out is through. There is no other way, that it is through. It's in the process. That's where the work is done, and that's where you find yourself, and the ways in which you can cope, and that's where you dig deep and find that psychological resilience that you do have. Somewhere deep down. But the pits of grief really push you into finding what those are. All right, so we do have a question from Trevlin. We have a question. Well, first of all, it's thank you for sharing this powerful narrative. Do you view your psychological background and understanding as a gift within your personal grief and a healing journey?
I think I do. I think that there's something about being able to retreat to the intellectual parts of what I know and what I studied and how I understand the process. That process, I think that kind of helped put things into perspective for me. However, I think that it gave some language, but not fully, because the emotional experience cannot be fully captured by what I had learned. The emotional experience that I went through and continue to go through, right? Because it's a never-ending journey. It's what I continue to go through, I think has helped me in some way. But I think it was still actually the feeling and understanding and acknowledging, and that process was really kind of fully where the work happened.
Again, that no one can ever be the master of your emotional experience. There can be lots of literature written about it, but there's no better learning and teacher than your own personal experience.
Well, that's it.
And Krystel, is there, just as we end off, any books or podcasts, recommendations that you would want to share that you feel helped you in your journey and that you use at your practice as well to help patients that are on a similar journey?
Yeah.
Anything that comes to mind that has been helpful?
Yeah. So the first book, actually, that as you asked that question, the first book that came to mind, I read it, I think maybe a year or two into my grief journey, it was called The Choice by Dr. Edith Eiger, and she is a Jewish psychologist that actually went through the concentration camp. And obviously she spoke about her experience and grief and what it looked like, and I truly believe that that gave me almost kind of another tool for me to think about this, and how I choose to walk my journey is actually a choice. And
Mm,
because it was a choice, it gave me a little bit more ownership that something wasn't happening to me, but I had some control with how I choose to walk out this journey. And I found it a really powerful book, depending on where people are at in the journey, because she does go into her story. But I found her story so powerful, so moving, and a lot of the themes that came up for me in the book really kind of helped me think about the choice that we have as we also just navigate life and the difficulties that we experience in life, and the fact that there is some choice that we have and how we choose to walk out this journey, and that gives us a little
mm,
control, which is sometimes we feel like we don't have it. But that's really the first book that comes to mind that helped me specifically.
mm. All right. Thank you so much, Crystal.
My pleasure.
Thank you for sharing your expertise, but more importantly, thank you for sharing your personal journey around such a sore topic. It certainly for me still, it doesn't feel like it's been 5 years since the passing of Corali. But it's been a process. It's been quite a journey also watching you go through your process and becoming a mom, a clinician, a psychologist. So really feel very grateful that you could come here today and really put yourself out there and share and normalize in a way this very unimaginable experience that we struggle with as human beings.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to seeing you again and look forward to other conversations in future. But Crystal, one last thing, where can our viewers find you? Are you on any social media, professional pages
Yeah.
that they can, if at all, just in case someone wants to reach out to you?
Yeah, sure. So I am listed on our website, which is bbfamily.org. I am also, you can reach out to me on my social media, crystal.ngoy, and also in the process of kind of putting my professional page up. But it was an absolute pleasure, Batetshi. Thank you so much for having me. This is such a beautiful. I love the way in which you navigate these topics with so much tender love and care, and I appreciate being here today.
All right, thank you so much. Now we can let you go and finish off your lunch
Thank you.
and get back to seeing the next patient.
Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. Bye-bye, everyone. I will see you again in a couple of weeks at the next installment of On Being Humans, a conversation. That will be our final installment for season 1. So excited for that. So thank you, everyone. I hope that you found today's session empowering and that you leave with some nuggets of insight that you can use along your journey. Good evening, everyone.